Battling the pain and betrayal from a broken marriage with $50,000 in debt, a single mom and her only son buys an old house and discovers a fortune under the floorboards. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's begin. The house should have collapsed years ago. So should she. But some things, and some people, hold more inside them than anyone realizes. The house wasn't supposed to be hers. Not really. Not the way it happened. Melissa Hartman hadn't come to the auction expecting anything, let alone a winning bid of $50. But there it was. $50 and a signature later, and she was holding the keys to a place no one wanted. No one, that is, except a single mother with $50,000 in debt, a duffel bag of clothes, and a 9-year-old who still believed in miracles. And just like that, the house became hers. There was no cheering, no applause, just the scratch of a pen and the dull echo of disbelief in her chest. Melissa had lost almost everything, her husband, her savings, her home. But somehow, in the middle of all that ruin, she'd bought a future for the price of a second-hand microwave. Funny how survival sometimes disguises itself as surrender. Or maybe it was the other way around. People talk about rock bottom like it's a moment, a single, shattering fall. But Melissa knew better. Rock bottom was slow. It crept up while you were still smiling at the grocery store and pretending everything was fine. It whispered in overdue notices and empty voicemail inboxes. It looked a lot like silence. And then one day, you're standing in front of a sagging roof and boarded-up windows, wondering how many more pieces of yourself you're supposed to trade for the promise of stability. But this story, it's not just about what she lost. It's about what was waiting to be found. For Melissa, that house wasn't just falling apart. It was hiding something. And it wasn't long before a loose floorboard, a curious child, and a rusted box of secrets would rewrite everything. The first night in the house, Melissa didn't sleep. Not because of fear exactly, though the wind did rattle the loose window panes and the shadows in the corners stretched long and unfamiliar. It was more that sleep felt like a luxury she hadn't earned yet. Like if she closed her eyes, the whole fragile thing might collapse. The house, the plan, the last shred of hope she was clinging to. Ethan slept beside her on the mattress they'd dragged in from the truck. His breathing was soft and even, unbothered by the cold or the darkness or the fact that there was no electricity. She'd wrapped him in every blanket they owned, and he'd drifted off without complaint, one small hand curled beneath his chin. He still trusted her. That was the part that kept her awake. They'd moved in with almost nothing. A mattress, 2 duffel bags stuffed with clothes, a cardboard box of kitchen supplies, mismatched plates, a dented pot, a can opener that barely worked. The camping stove she'd bought at a thrift store sat in the corner, still in its plastic wrapper. It would have to be enough. The house had no running water, no heat. The electrical panel looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1970s, and even if it worked, Melissa couldn't afford to have it turned on. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to make the next paycheck stretch past groceries and gas. She'd known all of this going in. The inspection report had been brutal, but knowing something and living it were two very different things. In the dim morning light, the house revealed itself in pieces. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like bruises. The floorboards creaked and sagged underfoot. The kitchen faucet hung loose from the wall, and the back door didn't quite close all the way, a sliver of cold air whistling through the gap. Melissa stood in the center of what used to be a living room and felt the weight of it settle over her. This was home now. She couldn't let Ethan see her falter. "Mom, look!" Ethan's voice echoed from somewhere upstairs. Melissa climbed the narrow staircase, gripping the railing, which wobbled under her hand, and found him in one of the smaller bedrooms. Dust motes swirled in the pale sunlight streaming through a cracked window. "There's a loft," he said, pointing up, "like a secret room." She followed his gaze. Sure enough, A small hatch door was built into the ceiling, barely visible beneath years of grime and peeling paint. "We'll check it out later," she said gently. "First, let's see if we can get some of these windows open. Air the place out." Ethan nodded, already moving to the next room. His curiosity was relentless, untouched by the reality she was drowning in. To him, this wasn't a condemned house. It was an adventure. She envied that. There had been better days. Melissa remembered them in flashes, unguarded moments that snuck up on her when she wasn't braced for it. The apartment they used to rent, small but clean, with heat that actually worked. Ethan's 4th birthday when Thomas had surprised him with a cake shaped like a dinosaur. The sound of laughter over dinner. The feeling of being able to pay a bill without checking the account 3 times first. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been theirs. And then Thomas started losing. First at poker nights with friends, then at the casino an hour outside town, then online, in the deep hours of the night when he thought she was asleep. The money disappeared in chunks. Savings, then credit, then loans she didn't know he'd taken out. By the time he left, the debts were already drowning her. He'd said he was sorry. He'd said he'd fix it. He never did. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. She had 30 days. She'd spent 29 of them applying for apartments she couldn't afford, begging landlords to overlook her credit score, and lying to Ethan about why they were packing everything into boxes. On day 30, she saw the auction notice online. Foreclosed property, condemned structure, sold as is. Minimum bid, $50. It felt like a punchline. It felt like a lifeline. By the end of the first week, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Melissa woke before dawn, boiled water on the camping stove for instant oatmeal, and sent Ethan off to school on the bus that stopped at the end of the long gravel driveway. Then she worked. Freelance listings for real estate agencies, remote data entry gigs, anything she could do on her laptop using the public library's Wi-Fi. In the evenings, they worked on the house together. Ethan helped her sweep out rooms, pile broken furniture by the road, and scrub years of dust from the windowsills. He didn't complain. Not once. He talked instead about school, about the chickens that wandered the property, about the old wooden beams in the attic that looked like a pirate ship. She realized somewhere in the middle of those long, exhausting nights that he was stronger than she'd given him credit for, and that maybe, just maybe, so was she. It was Ethan who first noticed the floors were strange. "Mom," he said one evening, crouched near the far wall of the living room. "Why do some of these boards look different?" Melissa glanced over. He was right. A few of the planks were darker, newer looking, as if they'd been replaced at some point. But the rest of the floor was original, scarred and uneven, centuries of footsteps worn into the grain. "Probably just old repairs," she said, distracted by the leaking pipe she was trying to wrap with electrical tape. Ethan ran his hand along the seam where the wood met. "It feels loose." "Don't pull on it," she warned. "Last thing we need is someone falling through the floor." He sat back on his heels, but his gaze lingered. Melissa made a mental note to check it later. The house was full of things like that. Little oddities that didn't quite add up. Doors that opened onto blank walls. A chimney that seemed too large for the fireplace. A cellar entrance she hadn't worked up the nerve to explore yet. It was an old house. Old houses had quirks. Still, something about the way Ethan stared at that floorboard made her uneasy. Like the house was whispering to him in a language she couldn't quite hear. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Melissa sat on the front steps and looked out at the overgrown yard. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light over the wild grass and the crooked fence line. She thought about the debt still hanging over her head, the calls she wasn't answering, the future she couldn't see past next week. But she also thought about Ethan's laughter earlier, when he'd chased one of the chickens around the yard. The way he'd said, "I like it here, Mom," without a trace of doubt. Maybe the house wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The knock came on a Saturday morning. 3 weeks after they'd moved in. Melissa was in the kitchen, if you could call it that, trying to coax the ancient sink drain into cooperating. Her hands were covered in rust and grime, her hair tied back in a bandana, and she was fairly certain she smelled like mildew and desperation. The sound startled her. No one had come by since they'd arrived. No neighbors, no mail carrier. The house sat far enough off the main road that most people probably didn't even know it was occupied. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked to the front door, peering through the warped glass. An older man stood on the front path. Late 60s, maybe older. He wore a weathered canvas jacket and a flat cap pulled low over silver hair. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and he stood with the posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors, shoulders slightly hunched, boots planted firm. Melissa hesitated, then opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The man looked up, his face lined and sun-worn. His eyes were pale blue, sharp despite his age. "You bought the Miller place," he said. Not a question. A statement. Melissa nodded slowly. "I did." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze shifting past her to the interior of the house, then back to her face. "My name's Jack Harlan," he said. "My grandfather built this house. Just wanted to see who finally got it." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite place. Not hostility exactly, but not warmth either. More like assessment. "Melissa Hartman," she said, keeping her voice polite but guarded. "And this is Mom?" Ethan appeared behind her, peeking around her arm. He looked at Jack with open curiosity. Jack's expression softened just slightly. "You've got yourself a helper, I see." "Something like that," Melissa said. She didn't move from the doorway. "Is there something I can do for you, Mr. Harlan?" "Just wanted to introduce myself," he said. "Property's been in and out of my family for generations. Grandfather built it back in the 20s. Augustus Miller bought it off him in the 40s. Been through a lot of hands since then." "Miller," Melissa repeated. The name on the deed paperwork. She'd seen it, filed it away, hadn't thought much of it. "That's right." Jack tilted his head slightly. "Mind if I come in? Just for a minute. Like to see what she looks like these days?" Melissa's instinct was to say no. But there was something disarming about the way he asked. Not pushy, just wistful. And if his family really had built the place, maybe he knew something useful. God knew she could use any advice on keeping the roof from caving in. "Sure," she said, stepping aside. "But it's not much to look at right now." "Never was," Jack said, with a faint smile. He moved through the house slowly, running a hand along the doorframe, pausing to look up at the exposed beams in the living room ceiling. Melissa followed a few steps behind, arms crossed. Ethan trailed after them both, silent but watchful. "Grandfather used oak for the frame," Jack said, almost to himself. "Said it'd outlast him. Guess he was right." "It's holding up," Melissa said carefully. "Barely." Jack glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You planning to fix it up or just ride it out till it falls down?" The question stung, though she tried not to show it. "I'm doing what I can," she said evenly. "It's livable, that's enough for now." He nodded, but didn't say anything. Just kept walking, his gaze sweeping over the walls, the floors, the corners where dust and time had gathered. When he reached the far side of the living room, he stopped, crouched down, ran his fingers over the floorboards, the same section Ethan had pointed out days before. "These been replaced," he murmured. "I noticed," Melissa said. Jack stayed there a moment longer, then stood, brushing his hands off on his jacket. He looked at her, and for the first time, something like a warning flickered in his eyes. "A lot of stories buried in these floorboards," he said quietly. Melissa frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his expression closing off. "Just that old houses keep secrets. Miller was a strange one. Kept to himself. Didn't trust banks, didn't trust people much either. Lived here alone for 30 years before he died. What happened to him? Ethan asked, his voice small. Jack glanced down at him. Died in his sleep, they say. No family left to claim anything. House went to the state. Been sitting empty ever since. Until now, Melissa said. Until now, Jack echoed. There was a beat of silence. Then Jack tipped his hat slightly. Well, I'll leave you to it. Just wanted to see the place one more time. You need anything, advice, tools, whatever. I'm not far. Ask around town for Harlan. Someone will point you my way. Thank you, Melissa said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame, looked back at her. Keep your ears open, he said. House like this? It'll talk to you if you listen. And then he was gone, boots crunching on the gravel path as he made his way back toward the road. Melissa stood in the doorway and watched him go, unease prickling at the back of her neck. Lot of stories buried in these floorboards. What the hell was that supposed to mean? That evening, Ethan was playing in the living room while Melissa sorted through a box of second-hand dishes she'd picked up at a yard sale. He had his toy cars lined up on the floor, making engine noises as he rolled them across the uneven boards. One of them, a red pickup truck, slipped between two planks and wedged tight. Mom, it's stuck, Ethan said, tugging at it. Pull gently, Melissa said without looking up. Don't break it. Ethan wiggled the truck free, but as he did, something else came loose with it. Something small and metallic, clinking onto the floor beside him. Whoa, he breathed. Melissa glanced over. What is it? Ethan held it up. A small object, tarnished and dirty, but unmistakably deliberate in shape. It looked like a key, old-fashioned, with an ornate handle and a strange, intricate design etched along the shaft. I found a key, Ethan said, eyes wide. Melissa set down the plate she was holding and crossed the room. She took the key from him, turning it over in her hands. It was heavy, real metal, definitely not some cheap hardware store copy. Where did this come from? She murmured. It was stuck in the floor, Ethan said, pointing. Right there, between the boards. Melissa crouched down, peering into the gap. Nothing else visible, just darkness and dust. She looked at the key again. Lot of stories buried in these floorboards. Jack's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time she wondered if he'd meant them literally. Can we keep it? Ethan asked. Melissa closed her fingers around the key and stood. Yeah, she said softly. We'll keep it. She didn't know why, but something told her they were going to need it. The key sat on the kitchen windowsill for 2 days before Melissa really thought about it. She'd been too busy trying to fix the leaking pipe under the sink, too consumed with stretching $12 worth of groceries across the rest of the week. The key was just another odd relic in a house full of them. Interesting, sure, but not urgent. It was Ethan who brought it back into focus. Do you think it opened something? He asked one afternoon, turning it over in his small hands. The tarnish had worn off slightly where he'd been rubbing it with his thumb. Melissa looked up from the laptop where she'd been filling out yet another job application. Maybe, but whatever it opened is probably long gone by now. Ethan frowned, unconvinced. He'd been obsessed with the key since he found it, carrying it around like a talisman. She'd caught him pressing it against old drawers, testing it in the back door lock, even holding it up to the light as if it might reveal something hidden. I'm gonna look for what it opens, he announced. Knock yourself out, Melissa said absently, eyes back on the screen. Just don't pull the house down while you're at it. She didn't think anything of it. Not until she heard him shout. Mom, Mom! Melissa's heart lurched. She was on her feet instantly, crossing the room in 3 strides. What? What happened? Are you hurt? Ethan was in the living room, crouched near the same stretch of floorboards Jack Harlan had touched. The same boards Ethan had been fascinated with for weeks. His face was flushed, eyes bright with excitement, not fear. I found it, he said breathlessly. The loose one. Look. One of the boards had been pried up slightly, tilted at an angle, Melissa could see the dark gap beneath it, a hollow space that shouldn't exist in a properly laid floor. "Ethan, I told you not to." "I didn't break it, I promise," he said quickly. "It was already loose. I just pulled a little and it came right up." Melissa knelt beside him, her pulse still racing. She gripped the edge of the board and lifted. It came away easily, almost too easily, revealing a shallow cavity carved into the subfloor beneath. And inside the cavity, something waited. A box. It was small, maybe the size of a shoebox, made of metal that had rusted orange and brown with age. The corners were dented, the surface pitted and worn, but it was intact, and it was heavy. Melissa's breath caught. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the box out of the floor and set it between them. Dust fell away in soft clouds. There was no lock, just a simple latch, corroded but still functional. "Should we open it?" Ethan asked. Melissa stared at the box. Lot of stories buried in these floorboards. Jack's voice echoed in her mind. Had he known? Was this what he'd been hinting at? "Yeah," she said quietly. "We should open it." She pressed the latch. It resisted, then gave with a metallic click. The lid creaked open. Inside were bundles, stacks of them wrapped tightly in yellowed paper and string, packed so carefully they fit together like puzzle pieces. Melissa pulled one out, her fingers trembling, and peeled back the wrapping. Bills. Old bills. $20 notes with faces and designs she barely recognized. The paper was brittle, slightly discolored, but intact. She counted the stack. 20 bills, $400. She reached for another bundle. Same thing. And another. And another. Ethan watched in silence, his eyes growing wider with each unwrapped stack. "Mom," he breathed. "Is that real money?" Melissa didn't answer. She was counting now, pulling bundle after bundle from the box, laying them out on the floor in rows. Her mind struggled to keep up with what she was seeing. 10 bundles, 20, 30, 50, more. When the box was finally empty, she sat back on her heels and stared. 280 bundles. $400 each. She did the math 3 times, certain she'd gotten it wrong. But the numbers didn't change. $112,000. $112,000, hidden beneath the floorboards of a house she'd bought for $50. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. "Are we allowed to keep it?" That was the question, wasn't it? Melissa's first instinct was panic. Her second was to put it back and pretend they'd never found it. Her third, the one that lodged itself in her chest and wouldn't let go, was to wonder what would happen if she didn't. She sat there on the floor, surrounded by stacks of cash that smelled like dust and time and somebody else's secrets, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This wasn't hers. It belonged to someone. Augustus Miller, probably. A dead man who'd hidden a fortune in his own house and never told a soul. But Miller was gone. The house had been abandoned, foreclosed, auctioned. She'd bought it legally. Whatever was in it, didn't that make it hers too? She thought about the $50,000 in debt crushing her, the collection calls she ignored every day, the credit cards maxed out on groceries and gas, the fear that kept her awake at night whispering that she couldn't do this, that she was going to fail, that Ethan deserved better than a mother who couldn't even keep the lights on. This money could change that. It could change everything. "Mom?" Ethan said again, quieter now. Melissa looked at him, at his wide, trusting eyes, at the boy who'd never once complained about sleeping on a mattress in a freezing house, who'd eaten canned soup without protest, who still believed she could fix anything. She thought about what she owed him, and what she owed the ghost of a man who'd buried his fortune rather than let anyone else have it. "We keep it," she said softly. Ethan blinked. "Really? Really? Her voice was steadier now. But we don't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I figure out what to do. It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't even a good one. But it was the truth. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Melissa sat alone in the dark and counted the money again. She didn't take it all out, just ran her fingers over the bundles, feeling the weight of them. The possibility. She thought about paying off the credit cards, fixing the roof, buying Ethan new clothes that actually fit, maybe even getting the electricity turned on. Small things, practical things, things that wouldn't draw attention. She closed the box and carried it upstairs, hiding it in the back of the closet beneath a pile of old blankets. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear this time, from something closer to hope. The transformation began quietly. Melissa withdrew small amounts, 200 here, 300 there, using cash at hardware stores in neighboring towns where no one knew her. She bought supplies to patch the roof, a space heater for Ethan's room, plywood to cover the broken windows. She told herself she'd pay it back someday. Return it, report it, do the right thing. But every time she thought about making that call, she remembered the eviction notice, the debt collectors, the look on Ethan's face when she'd told him they had to leave their apartment, and she kept the box hidden. The house began to change around them, slowly, one repair at a time. It wasn't much, but for the first time in months, it felt like they weren't drowning. It felt like they might actually make it. The cellar had been on Melissa's list of things to avoid. "It's his," she said quietly. "Augustus Miller, the man who lived here." She turned the page. The journal entries were sporadic, scattered across years. Some pages were filled with dense paragraphs, others just a few lines. Melissa read them slowly, Ethan leaning against her shoulder, both of them drawn into the voice of a man long dead. June 12th, 1946. Returned from the funeral today. Edmund is gone, buried in a plot I'll never visit again. Mother says I should be grateful. At least we have a body to bury. So many families don't. But gratitude feels like a word from another language. I don't speak it anymore. Melissa paused, a heaviness settling in her chest. Edmund. Jack had mentioned Augustus lost a brother in the war. She kept reading. September 3rd, 1947. Father's estate is settled, or as settled as it will ever be. My cousins fought me for every dollar, every acre. They said I had no right to it. Perhaps they're correct, but I am the last Miller with the name, and I will not let them take what Edmund died believing would be ours. I've hidden what matters most. They will never find it. Let them have the rest. Ethan's finger traced the edge of the page. He hid stuff from his family? Looks like it, Melissa murmured. December 19th, 1951. I do not trust banks. I do not trust lawyers. I do not trust anyone who smiles while counting another man's money. What I have, I will keep close. The house knows my secrets. Let it keep them after I'm gone. Melissa flipped through more pages. Entries about the farm, about long winters, about the isolation Augustus seemed to prefer. And then, near the end of the journal, an entry that made her stop cold. April 2nd, 1962. I am getting old. My hands shake when I write. I know I will not see another decade. The money in the floor should be enough for whoever finds it. A gift, perhaps. Or a test. But the true vault, that is for someone worthy. Someone who looks beyond the surface. Someone who understands that the most valuable things are not always gold. The hearthstone knows. It has always known. Melissa read the passage 3 times. The true vault. Her pulse quickened. Mom? Ethan's voice pulled her back. What's a hearthstone? She looked at him, then toward the living room, where the old fireplace sat dark and unused. It's the stone at the base of a fireplace, she said slowly. The foundation. Ethan's eyes widened. Do we have one? Yeah, Melissa said. We do. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Melissa sat at the table with the journal open in front of her. She'd read every entry now, some of them twice. Augustus Miller's life unfolded in fragments. A man haunted by loss, bitter over betrayal, determined to keep what was his even if it meant taking it to the grave. She studied the photographs that had been tucked into the journal. One showed two young men in military uniforms, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning despite the weight of what was coming. Augustus and Edmund, she assumed. Brothers before the war took one of them. Another photo showed the house. This house, decades younger, the paint still fresh, the yard neat and orderly. The last was a portrait of an older Augustus, alone, staring into the camera with eyes that looked tired and weary and unbearably sad. Melissa closed the journal gently, her fingers resting on the worn cover. She'd thought finding the money was the end of it, a stroke of luck, a windfall that would let them survive. But this wasn't about luck. This was about a man who'd buried his life piece by piece, hiding it away from people who wanted to take it from him. A man who died alone in this house, surrounded by secrets no one had bothered to uncover. Until now. Melissa's gaze drifted toward the living room, toward the fireplace. The hearthstone nose. She didn't know what she'd find there, but she knew, with a certainty that made her hands tremble, that Augustus Miller's story wasn't finished, and neither was hers. Jack Harlan came back on a Thursday. Melissa saw his truck pull up the drive just after noon, the same weathered Ford he'd arrived in before. She'd been outside hanging laundry on the line she'd strung between two posts, sheets and Ethan's shirts flapping in the October wind. Her stomach tightened. She watched him climb out slowly, adjusting his cap, taking his time, like he had all day, like he belonged here. "Mr. Harlan?" she called out, keeping her voice neutral. "Ms. Hartman." He walked toward her, hands in his jacket pockets. His gaze swept over the property, the patched roof, the new glass in the windows, the freshly painted trim around the front door. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Place is looking better," he said. Not quite a compliment. More like an observation that demanded explanation. "Doing what I can," Melissa said carefully. "Must be doing well for yourself then. Repairs like that don't come cheap." There it was. The question beneath the question. "I'm getting by," she said, "picking up extra work here and there." Jack nodded slowly, his pale eyes lingering on the new heater unit visible through the living room window. "That's good. Real good. House like this, it can swallow money faster than you can throw it in. Want to be careful you don't get in over your head." "I'll keep that in mind." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. The wind tugged at the laundry, snapping fabric like distant gunshots. "You find anything interesting?" Jack asked. "While you've been fixing things up?" Melissa's pulse jumped, but she kept her face still. "Like what?" "Oh, I don't know. Old houses like this, sometimes people leave things behind. Tools, furniture, sometimes more than that." His tone was casual. Too casual. "Just junk, mostly," Melissa said. "Broken shelves, rusted nails. Why?" Jack shrugged. "Just curious. My grandfather, he always said Augustus Miller was an odd duck, didn't trust anyone, kept everything close." He looked at her directly now. Real close. Melissa met his gaze. "If he left anything valuable, I haven't found it." It wasn't technically a lie. The cash was hidden. The journal was upstairs, tucked beneath her mattress. And whatever was under the hearthstone, if there was anything, she hadn't uncovered yet. Jack studied her for a long moment, then smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Well, you let me know if you do. Man's got no heirs, but history's worth preserving. Hate to see anything important get lost." "I'll keep that in mind," Melissa said again. He tipped his hat and walked back to his truck, taking his time. Melissa stood there until he'd driven away, dust trailing behind him down the long gravel drive. Her hands were shaking. The next day, Melissa noticed the car. It was late afternoon and she was driving back from the grocery store with Ethan when she saw it. A dark sedan parked on the shoulder of the road about a quarter mile from their turnoff. Just sitting there, engine running. She slowed as she passed. Couldn't see the driver clearly through the tinted windows, but she felt eyes on her. "Who's that?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Melissa said quietly. When she checked the rearview mirror, the car was pulling onto the road behind them. It followed at a distance all the way to the house, then kept going, disappearing around the bend. But Melissa's heart didn't stop racing for an hour. She saw the car again 2 days later. Different spot, same stretch of road. And the day after that, a different vehicle, a gray pickup this time, parked near the tree line, just visible from the kitchen window. Watching. Melissa told herself she was being paranoid, that it was just coincidence, that there were 100 reasons someone might park on a country road. But she didn't believe it. Someone knew. The break-in happened on a Tuesday night. Melissa woke to the sound of something crashing upstairs. Not loud, just a muffled thump like something heavy being moved. She was on her feet instantly, heart hammering, reaching for the baseball bat she'd started keeping by the bed. Ethan stirred beside her. "Mom?" "Stay here," she whispered. "Don't move." She crept into the hallway, bat raised, every nerve screaming. The house was dark, silent now, but the attic door, the one at the end of the hall that she always kept closed, was open. Melissa's breath came shallow and fast. She moved toward it, step by careful step, listening. Nothing. She reached the doorway and looked up into the narrow attic stairs. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating disturbed boxes, overturned crates, scattered belongings. Someone had been up there. Someone had gone through everything. She climbed the stairs slowly, bat ready, but the space was empty now. The small window at the far end was open, cold air pouring in. That's how they'd gotten in. Climbed up somehow, forced the window. Melissa checked every box, every corner. Nothing seemed to be missing, but everything had been searched, methodically, deliberately. They were looking for something, and they hadn't found it. Melissa didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in Ethan's room with the bat across her lap, watching the shadows, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. At dawn, she installed new locks on every door and window she could reach. She moved the cash box from the closet to beneath a loose board in Ethan's room, somewhere no one would think to look, and she stopped letting Ethan play outside alone. "Why can't I go see the chickens?" he asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because I said so," Melissa snapped, then immediately regretted it. She softened. "Just stay close for a while, okay? Please." He nodded, confused but compliant. Melissa hated the fear she saw creeping into his eyes, hated that this house, their refuge, was starting to feel like a trap. That night, she pulled out Augustus Miller's journal again. She'd read it cover to cover already, but she went back through it now with different eyes, looking for clues, warnings, anything that might explain why people were suddenly so interested in a house they'd ignored for decades. Most of the entries were familiar now, but one near the middle caught her attention in a way it hadn't before. March 15, 1958. Trust is a luxury I cannot afford. What I have built in layers. The first layer is for the desperate, those who need it most. The second is for the patient, those who look beyond the obvious. And the third is for someone who understands that the foundation holds everything. The hearthstone has borne the weight of this house for 30 years. Let it bear the weight of my legacy as well. What lies beneath will only be found by those who know where the true heart of a home resides. Melissa read it 3 times, her pulse quickening. The foundation holds everything. What lies beneath? The hearthstone. Augustus wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. She closed the journal and looked toward the living room, where the old fireplace sat cold and dark, its wide stone hearth scarred from decades of use. She'd been so focused on the money she'd already found, she hadn't thought to look further, but Augustus had. He'd hidden something else, something he considered more important than the cash, something he called his legacy, and it was waiting beneath the hearthstone. Melissa glanced at Ethan's closed door, making sure he was asleep. Then she walked into the living room and knelt in front of the fireplace. The hearthstone was large, a single slab of granite set flush with the floor. She ran her hands along its edges, looking for seams, gaps, anything that might indicate it could be moved. At first, nothing, just cold, solid stone. Then her fingers caught on something, a small indentation near the back corner, hidden in shadow. She pressed it. A faint click. Melissa's breath stopped. The stone shifted, just barely. But it moved. Someone had been here before her. Someone had built this intentionally. She didn't have the strength to lift it. Not tonight. Not alone. But she knew what she had to do. Tomorrow she would find out what Augustus Miller had been protecting all these years, and she would make damn sure no one else got to it first. Melissa waited until Saturday, not because she wanted to. Every night that week she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, knowing what was hidden beneath the hearthstone, knowing she was so close. But she couldn't do it alone. The stone was too heavy, and if she was honest with herself, she didn't want to face whatever was down there by herself. So she waited for the weekend when Ethan would be home, when they could do this together, just like they'd done everything else. "We're going to move the hearthstone," Melissa said Saturday morning over breakfast. Ethan looked up from his cereal, eyes widening. "Really? You think there's something under it?" "I know there is," Melissa said. She pulled out Augustus's journal, opening it to the marked page. He wrote about it. The foundation. The hearthstone. It's all here. Ethan read the passage, lips moving slightly as he worked through the old-fashioned handwriting. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression that was equal parts excitement and fear. What if it's something bad? Melissa had thought about that too. Then we deal with it. But I don't think it is. I think Augustus hid something he wanted found. Eventually. By the right person. You think that's us? She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I think we're about to find out. They moved the furniture first. The old armchair, the makeshift coffee table Melissa had cobbled together from salvaged wood. The hearthstone sat exposed now, a rectangle of dark granite about 4 feet long and 3 feet wide. Melissa knelt beside it, running her hands along the edges again, finding the hidden indentation she'd discovered before. She pressed it, heard the same soft click. "Help me lift," she said. Ethan positioned himself on the opposite side. Together they gripped the edge and pulled. The stone was heavy, impossibly heavy, but it moved. Inch by inch they slid it aside, revealing the dark space beneath, and cut into the floor below was a trap door. It was wooden, old but solid, with an iron ring set into its surface. Melissa stared at it, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "are you sure?" No. She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. But she pulled the ring anyway. The door opened with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in decades. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of earth and stone, and something else. Something old and undisturbed. Below was a ladder, descending into darkness. Melissa grabbed the flashlight. "Stay close to me." The ladder was sturdy, bolted into the stone walls of a narrow shaft. Melissa climbed down slowly, testing each rung before putting her weight on it. Ethan followed above her, his small hands gripping tight. 10 feet down, 15, 20. Then her feet touched ground. She stepped off the ladder and swept her flashlight across the space, and the breath left her lungs. It was a vault, not large, maybe 10 feet by 12, but clearly intentional. The walls were stone, expertly fitted. The ceiling was supported by wooden beams that looked hand-hewn. And along the walls, arranged on shelves and in wooden crates, were boxes. Dozens of them. Ethan reached the bottom and stood beside her, his own flashlight beam joining hers. Whoa! Melissa moved forward, almost in a trance. She reached for the nearest box, a small wooden chest with a tarnished brass latch. She opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in rotted velvet, were gold coins. Real gold. She could tell by the weight, the color, the way they caught the light. Dozens of them, stamped with dates from the 1800s, faces of presidents long dead. She set it down and opened another box. This one held stock certificates, old formal documents with elaborate borders and official seals. She scanned the names. Some she didn't recognize, but others. Mom, that's the railroad, Ethan said, reading over her shoulder. We learned about it in school. That's like really old. Melissa's hands trembled as she set the certificates aside and reached for another crate. Inside were deeds, property deeds, land titles, documents transferring ownership of parcels across the county, all made out to Augustus Miller or his family. Another box held jewelry. Not costume pieces, real gemstones set in heavy gold and silver, necklaces, rings, a pocket watch that still ticked when she wound it. And in the corner, a larger chest made of dark wood, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Melissa knelt in front of it. The latch was unlocked. She lifted the lid. Inside were more documents, more deeds, more certificates. But on top of everything, in a sealed envelope marked simply, "To whom it may concern," was a letter. Her hand shook as she opened it. The handwriting was Augustus Miller's. She recognized it immediately. If you are reading this, you have done what my family could not. You looked. You persisted. You cared enough about this house to search for its heart. I do not know who you are. Perhaps you are a Miller, someone from a branch of the family I never knew. Perhaps you are a stranger who bought this place for pennies and saw something worth saving. It does not matter. What matters is that you are here. My family tried to take everything from me after my brother died. They said I had no right to our father's estate. They fought me in court, slandered my name, tried to prove me unfit. They wanted the money, the land, the legacy, but they did not want the responsibility that came with it. They did not want to remember Edmund. They only wanted to profit from his death. So I hid it, all of it. Let them have the scraps. Let them fight over furniture and silverware. What truly mattered, what Edmund and I built together, what our father left us, I kept safe. Hidden, waiting. I have lived alone in this house for 30 years. I have no wife, no children, no one to leave this to, and I am at peace with that. Because I know that whoever finds this vault will be someone who understands what it means to fight for something, to protect something, to refuse to let others take what is rightfully yours. Use it well, use it wisely. And if you can, remember that a man named Augustus Miller once lived here and he was not mad. He was simply careful. May you find the peace I never could. ACM. Melissa read the letter twice, her vision blurring. She felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder, small and warm. Mom, are you okay? She wasn't. She was breaking apart and coming together at the same time, grief and relief and gratitude crashing over her in waves she couldn't control. This wasn't just money. It wasn't just treasure. It was a gift, a legacy, a bridge across decades from one broken person to another saying, I see you. I understand. You deserve this. Mom? Melissa pulled Ethan into her arms and held him tight, her face pressed against his hair. The tears came then, hot and sudden and unstoppable, not from greed, not from shock, from relief. For the first time since Thomas left, since the debts piled up, since she'd stood in front of this crumbling house with nothing but hope and desperation, for the first time she could see a future, a real one, not just survival, not just getting by, a life, for both of them. We're going to be okay, she whispered into Ethan's hair. We're really going to be okay. Ethan hugged her back, his small arms fierce and strong. I know, Mom. I always knew. And somehow, that made her cry harder. They stayed in the vault for a long time, sitting among the boxes and the bones of Augustus Miller's hidden life. Melissa read the letter again. Then again. Eventually, they climbed back up, sealed the trap door, and slid the hearthstone back into place. The house was quiet around them, patient, like it had been waiting for this moment just as long as they had. Melissa looked at Ethan, at his dirt-smudged face and two big hand-me-down clothes and eyes that still saw wonder in everything. What do we do now? He asked. Melissa thought about Jack Harlan, about the strangers watching the house, about the break-in and the whispers and the danger still circling them. Now, she said quietly, we make sure no one can take this from us. Melissa spent 3 days researching lawyers before she found one she trusted. Most of the firms in town felt too visible, too connected. She needed someone discreet, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions but would give her honest answers, someone who understood that sometimes the law existed in shades of gray. She found him 2 towns over, a solo practitioner named Robert Chen, who specialized in estate law and property disputes. His office was above a hardware store, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked under her feet. The waiting room held exactly 3 chairs and a dying ficus. It felt right. Quiet. Unassuming. When she finally sat across from him, a lockbox of documents and photographs between them, she told him everything. The house, the auction, the hidden money, the vault, Augustus Miller's letter. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression neutral, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, he sat back and studied her for a long moment. You understand this is complicated, he said finally. I know. But not impossible. He pulled a legal pad toward him and began making notes. The key issue is whether this constitutes abandoned property or an estate asset. Miller died decades ago with no heirs. The property went through foreclosure and public auction. You purchased it legally. So it's mine? Melissa asked, hope and fear braiding together in her chest. Not quite that simple, Chen said. But there's precedent. In cases where personal property is discovered on land purchased through legal means, particularly when the original owner is deceased and no heirs have come forward, courts have ruled in favor of the current landowner, especially when significant time has passed. He tapped his pen against the pad. The cash is straightforward. It's been hidden for decades, no claims filed, no legal challenges. The other items, the gold, the stocks, the deeds, those require more documentation. But I believe we can establish legal ownership. How long? Melissa asked. 3 months, maybe 4. We'll need to file a quiet title action, establish chain of custody, document the discovery. If no one contests it, and given the timeline I doubt anyone will, you'll have clear legal claim to everything. Melissa let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. What do I owe you? Chen named a figure that made her wince, but it was manageable, especially now. There's one more thing, she said quietly. I want to donate part of it to a veterans organization in Augustus Miller's name. Chen smiled for the first time. I think that can be arranged. The process took exactly 3 months and 2 weeks. During that time, Melissa lived in a strange limbo, knowing what she had but unable to fully use it. She kept the vault sealed, touched nothing except what she needed for Chen's documentation. She took photographs, made lists, cataloged everything with meticulous care, and she waited. Jack Harlan came by twice more, asking questions she deflected with polite vagueness. The strangers stopped watching the house, or maybe Melissa just stopped noticing them. She was too focused on the future to worry about shadows in the rearview mirror. When Chen finally called with the news, Melissa was in the kitchen washing dishes. It's done, he said. The court ruled in your favor. Everything in that vault is legally yours. Melissa sat down hard on the nearest chair, her legs suddenly weak. Everything? Everything. I'm sending the paperwork over today. Congratulations, Ms. Hartman. You're a very wealthy woman. After she hung up, Melissa sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle around her. Ethan was at school. The chickens clucked outside. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows. She'd done it. Not by luck, not by chance, by persistence, by courage, by refusing to give up when everyone else had written her off. The first thing she did was pay off the debts. All of them. Every credit card, every medical bill, every collection notice that had haunted her for 2 years. She wrote checks with a steady hand and mailed them without ceremony. No fanfare, no celebration, just the quiet relief of watching the weight lift. The second thing she did was make good on her promise to Augustus. She donated $50,000 to the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter, earmarked for mental health services and family support. The donation was made anonymously, with one condition: that a plaque be placed in their hall commemorating Augustus Cornelius Miller and his brother Edmund, who gave his life in service. When the VFW director called to thank her, his voice thick with emotion, Melissa cried for the second time that week. The renovations began in earnest after that. But this time, Melissa wasn't just patching holes or making do. She was building something, transforming the house from a survival shelter into a home. She hired contractors to redo the electrical, update the plumbing, reinforce the foundation. She replaced rotted boards with new oak, restored the original windows, rebuilt the front porch so it no longer sagged under weight. She kept the character of the house, the exposed beams, the stone fireplace, the wide plank floors, but she added warmth, light, safety. Ethan picked out paint colors for his room, a soft blue that reminded him of the sky. Melissa chose cream and sage for the common areas, colors that felt like breathing room. And slowly, room by room, the house came back to life. The idea for the bed and breakfast came to her on a Tuesday afternoon. She was standing in one of the upstairs bedrooms, the one with the small loft Ethan had discovered that first week, and realized it was too much space for just the two of them, too many rooms, too much beauty to keep to themselves. Augustus had lived here alone for 30 years, hoarding his treasures and his grief. Melissa didn't want that. She wanted this house to be filled with people, with stories, with the kind of warmth Augustus had lost when his brother died. She sketched plans that night, sitting at the kitchen table with graph paper and colored pencils borrowed from Ethan's school supplies. 4 guest rooms upstairs, a common area downstairs, a breakfast nook with windows overlooking the property, the Hearthstone Inn. The name came to her fully formed, inevitable. This was where the heart of the house had been hidden, where Augustus had buried his legacy and his hope, where Melissa had found her future. It felt right. By late spring, the first renovations were complete. The house gleamed with fresh paint and new fixtures. The yard had been cleared, a proper garden planted where wild grass used to grow. The chickens had a new coop, built by Ethan with Melissa's help, painted bright red. Melissa stood on the front porch one evening, watching the sun set over the property, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, not the end of worry, but the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ethan came out to join her, leaning against the railing. He'd grown in the months since they'd moved in, taller, steadier, more confident. "You think people will want to stay here?" he asked. Melissa looked at the house, their house, and smiled. "I think people need places like this, places that feel like second chances." "Like us," Ethan said. "Yeah," Melissa said softly. "Like us." The sign went up a week later, hand-carved by a local craftsman, hung above the front gate. The Hearthstone Inn, established 2024. Melissa ran her fingers over the letters, feeling the grain of the wood, the weight of what it represented. This wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, built not on what she'd inherited, but on what she'd chosen to create. Augustus Miller had hidden his fortune to protect it from people who wanted to take without earning. Melissa was using hers to build something that would welcome anyone searching for refuge. She thought he would have approved. And as the first guests began to arrive, travelers and wanderers and people seeking quiet places to heal, Melissa realized that the house had finally found its purpose, not as a tomb for old secrets, but as a home for new beginnings. 6 months after the first guests arrived, Melissa stood in the kitchen of the Hearthstone Inn and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt afraid. The realization came quietly in the middle of an ordinary morning. She was making breakfast, actual breakfast, not instant oatmeal heated on a camping stove, while voices drifted in from the dining room. A couple from Portland, a solo traveler passing through on a cross-country road trip, an elderly woman visiting family nearby who'd chosen the inn over a sterile hotel chain. The coffee maker burbled. Bacon sizzled on the stove. Morning light poured through windows she'd restored with her own hands, and Melissa, for the first time in years, felt whole. The house had changed. That much was obvious to anyone who'd seen it before. Fresh paint covered walls that had once been water-stained and cracked. The floors gleamed, polished and repaired. The fireplace, the hearthstone now permanently sealed, its secret safe, hosted a fire most evenings. Guests gathered around it with mugs of tea and quiet conversation. But the real transformation wasn't in the house. It was in the people living in it. Ethan came thundering down the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, already talking before he hit the bottom step. "Mom, can Jake come over after school? We're working on a project about local history and I told him about the house and he really wants to see the old beams in the attic." "Breathe," Melissa said, smiling. "And yes, but you're both doing homework first." "Deal." Ethan grabbed a piece of toast from the counter, kissed her cheek in a gesture that was becoming rare as he grew older, and headed for the door. "Love you." "Love you too. Be safe." The door slammed. Through the window, Melissa watched him run to meet the school bus, saw him laugh at something another kid said, saw him climb aboard without a backward glance. He had friends now, real ones. He joined the school's robotics club. He talked about college sometimes, about becoming an engineer or maybe an architect. He dreamed again. That alone was worth everything they'd been through. The letter came on a Tuesday, tucked between a reservation confirmation and a utility bill. Melissa almost missed it. The envelope was plain, hand-addressed, no return label. She opened it standing at the mailbox, half expecting junk mail or another solicitation. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. "Dear Ms. Hartman, I owe you an apology. I suspect you knew I was looking for something when I came by those first few times. I wasn't as subtle as I thought. My grandfather told me stories when I was young, about Augustus Miller, about the fortune he'd hidden away, about the house that held secrets no one could find. I thought if anyone had a right to it, it was me. Family claim, you understand. I was wrong. I heard about the inn. Drove by last week, though I didn't stop. Didn't feel right after everything. But I saw what you've done with the place. Saw the sign, the gardens, the life you've brought back to those old bones. My grandfather would have been proud. Augustus too, I think. I spent years believing that house owed me something, that I deserved whatever was hidden there just because of my name. But you earned it, not by blood, by caring, by seeing value where everyone else saw ruin. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know I understand now. The house didn't choose me. It chose you. Take care of her. Seems like you already are. Jack Harlan." Melissa read the letter twice, standing in the autumn sunlight, leaves falling like slow rain around her. She thought about responding. Maybe she would, eventually. But for now, it was enough to know that the shadows had finally stopped circling. The house was hers. The life was hers. And no one could take that away. On a crisp Saturday morning in late October, Melissa stood in front of the house with Ethan beside her. It was the same view she'd had that first day. The brick and timber structure, the pitched roof, the wide porch. But everything else had changed. The shutters were straight now, painted a deep forest green. The windows gleamed, no longer broken or boarded. Flowers bloomed in beds she'd planted herself, chrysanthemums and asters in golds and purples. The grass was trimmed, the path swept clean, the chickens contained in their cheerful red coop. And above the door the sign she'd commissioned swayed gently in the breeze. The Hearthstone Inn. Hard to believe it's the same place, Ethan said quietly. Melissa smiled. It's not, really. Not anymore. He looked up at her, curious. What do you mean? She thought about how to explain it. About the house that had been falling apart and the people who'd been broken and the way they'd rebuilt each other, piece by piece, secret by secret. I used to think this house saved us, she said finally. That we got lucky. Found money and treasure and a way out. We did, though, Ethan said. Maybe. Melissa put her arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. But I think it's more than that. The house gave us a chance, but we're the ones who took it. We're the ones who fought for it, who saw past the rot and the ruin and believed it could be something better. Like you, Ethan said simply. The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked down at him, this boy who'd never stopped believing in her even when she'd stopped believing in herself. Like us, she corrected softly. Melissa thought about the journey that had brought them here, the marriage that had crumbled under the weight of addiction and lies, the debt that had crushed her, made her feel small and powerless, the eviction notice, the auction, the $50 gamble that had seemed like surrender disguised as hope. She thought about the nights spent boiling water on a camping stove, the mornings waking up terrified she wouldn't be able to provide, the constant fear that one wrong move would send them spiraling back into the darkness. And she thought about the discoveries, the rusted box beneath the floorboards, Augustus Miller's journal, the vault hidden under the hearthstone, the fortune that had waited decades for the right person to find it. But more than any of that, she thought about Ethan's hand in hers on that first day. The way he'd looked at the broken house and seen possibility instead of ruin. The way he'd never complained, never doubted, never stopped trusting that she would find a way. He'd been her foundation when everything else was crumbling, and she'd been his shelter when the world felt uncertain. The house hadn't saved them. They'd saved each other. A car pulled up the drive, new guests arriving for the weekend. Melissa waved, already shifting into innkeeper mode, ready to welcome them. But she paused for just a moment longer, looking at the house that had been a ruin and was now a refuge. The house that had held secrets and now held stories. The house that had been given up on and was now filled with life. You ready? Ethan asked. Melissa smiled. Yeah, I'm ready. They walked toward the porch together, mother and son side by side. Behind them, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the yard. The chickens clucked contentedly. The sign creaked gently on its chains. And the house, their house, in every sense that mattered, stood strong and whole, its foundation solid, its heart finally at peace. Melissa had started this journey broken and desperate, standing in front of a crumbling farmhouse with nothing but hope and $17 to her name. She was ending it whole, standing in front of a home she'd built from courage and stubborn refusal to give up. Not a victim, not a survivor, a builder, a mother, a woman who'd taken the bones of the past and carved a future from them. The house had held them when they needed shelter, and in return, they'd given it something it hadn't had in decades, a reason to stand, a purpose, a family, the end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.